Our third keynote speaker, Professor David Lynch, is Professor of Education in the School of Education at Southern Cross University. His research has been the basis of a radical rethink on teaching and teacher education. He is the author of numerous articles and texts on teacher education and one of Australia's foremost teacher education innovators. During his career, he has held a number of senior academic leadership positions and consults in education jurisdictions across the globe. Let us show our appreciation and welcome Professor David Lynch to share his research on designing a whole school improvement strategy, the key ingredients.
Thank you. These are the things that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. What is an outstanding school? So we've heard the term a couple of times this morning, so I want to pin that down. What is an outstanding school? I want to talk about change in schools, which really is about context. I want to very briefly digress to schooling for what? What are we actually schooling our young people for? I want to talk about teaching, the business, what we do. And importantly for this presentation, I want to talk about how do we create the outstanding schools. So I want to bring it all together. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a broad brushstroke, because there's quite a bit to talk about. I'm going to tell you what the research is telling us, what the evidence is showing we should be doing. Now, I'm making that point because for too long in education, the good ideas have got a Guernsey. It's very much about evidence-based. Essentially, I'm going to be front-loading the Creating the Outstanding School book, which you'll find in your satchel. The outstanding school. This has been an aspiration across the globe. I've had the privilege of travelling to many jurisdictions across the globe, and it's the same continual problem. They're still trying to find the outstanding school, to create it. Not only that, to sustain it. It's been distracted, it's been complicated, and it's been hampered. And it's a really concerning thing for me that education does not have the traction that a lot of other professions do. My theory is that we've all been to school. Everybody out there's been to school, and therefore we've got an opinion. Essentially what's happening is that we've got a globalised world, and it's largely becoming globalised through technology. And as a result, we're getting change. So, there's a changing world. I'm going to talk about that very briefly to give you an idea what that means for us as teachers and leaders. But I'm going to begin first of all because this schooling agenda that we've been chasing for decades needs refocusing. So for a start, I'm going to give you a definition. What an outstanding school is. And later on, I'm going to talk about what an outstanding teacher is. And I want to do this so you can put your finger on it. So that it's not just an aspirational thing. The outstanding school is one which has the sustained capacity to achieve defined sets of learning outcomes in every student at key schooling junctures. That's what the outstanding school's about. It's about every child, and it is sustainable. I want to digress, and I want to talk about change, because it's really, really important, the world in which we are operating as educators. The first understanding is that schools prepare young people predominantly for later life, for work in our society, work and life in our society. So we've got a really key role. Across the globe, increasingly, schools are being called upon to fill in the gaps. Busy parents, complicated world, lots of grey areas. So schools are being asked to fill in the gaps. As a consequence, the things that schools are expected to teach and students expected to learn has increased. We've got to get a handle on that. I'll talk about that in a minute. This society that we're talking about has many dimensions. Local, national, virtual, network, etc., etc. So when we talk society today, we're not just talking about a house in a community. This society has many challenges. Fundamentally, it's a result of exponential and seemingly endless technological change. But there is something that's emerging that I want you to be really conscious of, because this underpins why we have to have every school achieving for every child. Because fundamentally this change that we are talking about, the big challenge is automation. That's one of the big problems, challenges, let's say. Mechanisation, technology, essentially is taking away jobs. I read very recently where somebody's just invented the bricklaying machine. So there are certain bastions in our society where we could say, oh, that job will never go. The reality is technology is automating our world. Current human occupations are being replaced by machines. But here's the exciting things. New jobs are emerging. Totally, radically different jobs. Jobs that we don't even know right now what they'll be tomorrow. These are new jobs. But one thing we do know, these jobs are all highly skilled. So it means high levels of education for everyone. This is the context in which we're operating our schools. This is what we're preparing our young people for. Okay, so it's a tricky business. All right, so let's get back to the thesis of what we're talking about. So schooling. Okay, so we're going to become an outstanding school. That's the goal. What's the fundamentals? Essentially, what are we going to be doing in these schools? What's the curriculum? Now, I'm going to deviate once again because it's not our role, I think, to decide specifically what the curriculum is. I'm of the opinion that it should be defined by other people because it comes to represent society. And in most Western countries, no doubt the same in places like Dubai, governments. But what's happened, though, is that the education profession has lost its voice in all this. So I'm going to give a bit of clarity to it. So in other words, what should constitute the curriculum? Now I'm going to give you some key elements, some broad brushstrokes again because I haven't got time to go through all of them. But I'm going to essentially signal to you what you should be teaching. What are the sort of things that should be in the curriculum? I'm going to start by what I call the old basics. Literacy, numeracy is one of the fundamentals. It's our means of communicating, computating, operating within our society. So these old basics will continue. So the challenge is to ensure that every student gets these old basics. I've also put in here information communication technologies, the front end. That's an old basic. That should be part and parcel of it. But there are what I'm going to call new basics. For a start, information communication technologies, we should be teaching the back end, not necessarily alone the front end. Because most kids pick up the front end. It's the back end. How do you code? How do you make an app? How do you develop a website? These are the new basics, like literacy and numeracy. Because that's where the technology and the innovation is occurring, in the back end. Every consumer is operating in the front end. So if you are just teaching the front end, you're competing with all the commercial providers. It's the back end. The next area is new capabilities. essentially the sort of skills, the knowledge that people have to have today. They need to be problem solvers, creators, innovators, entrepreneurs, networkers, problems, risk takers, etc. New capabilities. How are you teaching that? Okay, so let's now get back to the body of this, towards the outstanding school. So now I want to move us towards the outstanding school. In the research that I've conducted and I've read about, telling people how to do it is not enough. As Tina made the point, get a very inspirational leader there, you can change the world very temporarily and very superficially. Remember that definition, sustained capacity. So that's what we're on about. It's every student. It's a tough gig. It's every student. And if you plan to do that in your Year 3 classroom by yourself, straight away, you failed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Okay. So if we're going to create the outstanding school, we've got to know what the variables are. What are the things that play out that can either be benefits, challenges, impediments, hiccups, call it what you will. Because once you know what these variables are and what you can deal with, you've then got a pathway into the evidence. Now, I'm helped in this work by a bloke by the name of John Hattie, Visible Learning. If you've not read that book, get a copy. He's done all the hard work for you. He's distilled what the research evidence is saying. But here's the variables. Here are the things here. The child, the makeup of the child. The home, the school, the principal, and the teacher. They're the variables. They're the things that will come into play, positively or negatively, and will impact your capacity to be that outstanding school. See these two things here? Can't do much about those, so we'll put those to the side. Okay? So we're not, that's really out of our scope. Try as we may, so let's not put too much of our energy there. But you see these three things here? Yes, they are. So, the school, the principal, and the teacher are three things that come into scope if we're going to create the outstanding school. But there's one in particular. There's one in particular that makes the fundamental difference. And the winner is the teacher. So I hope you're starting to get an idea of what the outstanding school comprises. Teachers. But not so much the metaphysical, if you like. What you do, the teaching. So let's take stock of what we've done so far. That's our definition, folks. That's our definition. That's what an outstanding school is. That's what you're aiming for. So there's some old basics. We cannot forget them. There are some new basics. And there are new capabilities. I remember when I was at school, one of the capabilities is to line up. That was one of the capabilities. That was how we had an orderly society. We still need that. But there are other things now. Impact, the school, the principal, and the teacher. Teachers are key. Okay, attributes now. So we know what a definition of our outstanding school is. Let's look at the attributes. So in other words, if you were to go in there and have a look, here are the attributes. In other words, here's what the research is telling us are the attributes of these schools. It's all about teachers, teaching. Now we need some enablers. These things can't happen in isolation, so we need good leaders. We need schools that have a certain profile. But I'm going to focus on the teacher. Because unless you get every teacher in a school operating effectively, outstanding, you'll never be that outstanding school. Clear set of capabilities. Okay, so let's start unpacking this a little bit. Teaching. If you do a trawl through the literature, there are so many models, so many terms for all this teaching. What I'm going to try and do is I'm going to put it into a little framework for you. And the reason why I'm putting it into a little framework is because it has to do with what's in that book, Creating Outstanding Schools. That book, if you like, brings together all the essential ingredients to create an outstanding school. In other words, it's a bit like a recipe book, if you like. But one of the important things about creating the outstanding teacher is feedback. And one of the big problems I'm going to suggest why teaching in some areas has fallen to a malaise because teachers do it in isolation. And if they feel good, it must be good. There's no third party giving feedback. So let's have a look at teaching. All right, so I'm going to now unpack the elements, if you like. So when we look at teaching as a broad brush concept, the first part is planning. I prefer the term design, to have an intent. Planning. So in other words, I'm unpacking the skill sets that teachers in this outstanding school have to have. They need to be able to diagnose. When you get the data, when you look at the profile of a student, you need to be able to diagnose what's going on. Because they're year 3 does not mean they're year 3 ability or grade 3. This one here I think is interesting. Knowledge of the instructional hierarchy. When you teach anything, any knowledge has a hierarchy. You cannot learn that knowledge until you know that knowledge and that knowledge and that knowledge. So if you're teaching up here and they don't understand this or they haven't got that knowledge, they will fail. That's the knowledge hierarchy. Correspondingly, there's an instructional hierarchy. In other words, you've got to teach in a certain way. That's what planning's about. The second one is organising. This is what Dr. Jake was talking about. What Tina was talking about. Place, time, that's organising for effect. Creating and maintaining, expanding, exploiting. So these, you organise. But this is where we really hit the road. Instruction. Notice how I've not said teaching. Instruction. Because in order to instruct, you must have the other elements. And leadership. Taken to get its POIL. P-O-I-L. So, when you teach, you plan, you organise, you instruct. But one of the things about teachers and teaching is we are leaders, folks. We are key members of our profession and our society. We have a capacity to work with others to improve. We enrol others to create. Okay, so let's explore a model. All right, so in other words, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bring all this to bear. I'm going to pluck all the research out and I'm going to put it in a diagram because a picture paints 1,000 words. You've got a book there, that's how you unpack the knowledge hierarchy, because the book there shows you all the component pieces. But I'm going to give you a diagram. What do you think is going to appear in the middle? Teaching! Right, so Teaching needs to be front and centre. In the outstanding school, you are about teaching. There's a performance data regime. That's what Dr. Jake was talking about this morning. Distributed leadership. And one of the things that's very effective in this environment is to teach in teams. No other profession works in isolation. They have teams of people in which they consult and they operate with. That's how they can differentiate. That's how they can individualise and customise. Because they're all doing a bit of the job, if you like. You imagine if you're going for surgery and you've got to take the teacher mindset. Well, not only are you going to be giving them a bed bath, you're going to be giving them an anaesthetic, you're going to be cutting them up, you're going to be holding their hand, you're going to be cooking their dinner. The reality is you have to work in a team. And each person has a particular role. Coaching, mentoring, and feedback. This is an important one. Because you're in the knowledge game. And knowledge comes from research. So this should be part and parcel. That's another way of saying a culture of inquiry. But you've got to have some teaching performance benchmarks. You've got to know what you're comparing yourself to. Okay. Conclusion. Let me sum it all up. I hope the presentation has focused you to what's important. Teaching is important. Automation is redefining human endeavour. I chose to put that in there because I want to give you something tangible to appreciate what's going to be like in the future. So the sort of jobs that are here today, and in my generation, if you weren't real smart at school, you could always be a low-skilled labourer or whatever. That won't be a thing in the future. While jobs will disappear, new ones will emerge, but they require high levels of education. And I don't just mean more qualifications, I mean depth. Okay? In this modern world, failure is not an option. And mediocrity, particularly in education, serves no one. The outstanding school is one which has a sustained capacity. You can do this time after time after time to achieve defined sets of learning outcomes. So in other words, we know what we're aiming for. They're defined. We're not going to make it up as we go along. In every student. At key schooling junctures. But all of this is effective teaching. That's the fundamental driver in this outstanding school. Thank you.